friends. So that's a Merry Christmas, right? So
that is kind of, I mean, it does kind of like for the traditional landed nobility.
Exactly.
It seems very...
Feudalism is far from dead
right,
at this point in time, and the class distinctions behind that, certainly. So, yeah, if you're born to gentry, especially if you're the second and third born son who's not going to inherit anything but your good name and your education, make the best use of it. Be a mercenary. Come out to places like this. Get these places in order. Command men. Raise companies of men if you can. Go and fight in the Netherlands. Take prizes. Take towns. Pillage. Take hostages especially. That's why people are spending so much money on shiny armor and things like that. It's an insurance policy. It might stop a ball, but the people are going to take... Oh, sure. People are going to take pains to...
not be compelled to work for the 12 days of Christmas, that is between Christmas Day and January 6th, which is the Feast of the Epiphany, which is when the Magi show up. So during those 12 days, traditionally in England, during the agricultural year, this is basically your long holiday. So Christmas is an opportunity to sort of blow off steam because you have been working all year. The winds have picked up, it's gotten very dark, it's getting to that time of the year where you really need to have some way to kind of let loose and enjoy yourself, because we're right in between sort of the final sort of parts of the agricultural year and Lent, which is a very depressing time when you're supposed to feel bad about yourself. So this is the time to feel good. And so during this season, we'll be cooking things up. We'll be using a lot of things that we've saved. So generally meat is sort of consumed. The last of the sort of semi-fresh meat is eaten at this time. A lot of that stuff will be maybe slaughtered all the way back in early November at the Feast of St. Martin. And this is our opportunity to use up any meat which is not going to keep further on into the winter. Because we're eating a lot of meat, which is basically on the verge of going off, we're going to be covering it up with a lot of things that we will have saved specifically for this time of year, including things like spices, things like currants, raisins. These are things that are very expensive because they have to be imported into England. So English people generally tend to keep it off until Christmas. And nutmeg, for example, which comes from just one set of islands in Indonesia at this period of time, is very, very expensive, but it really does the trick when you're trying to cover up the taste of meat, which is just on the verge of going bad, right? So, this is why English people are going to have these sort of minced meats, which used to have meat in them, with raisins, with nutmeg, with spices and things. So that's really what sort of Christmas is about from like an eating, drinking perspective. It's just a time to let loose, eat a lot, because you're not going to have much in the following season. So you're just going to try and enjoy yourself while you can, basically. And obviously, as you saw, or maybe you saw on the other side, as you go over there to the other side of the house where they're playing games and pranks and things. Yep. So there's going to be a lot of merrymaking and revelry, 12 days of it. A lot of people are drinking heavily starting in the morning and going all the way to the evening. So you're going to have a lot of people behaving a little badly. This is one of the reasons that Christmas is going to have a bit of a popularity hit in the early 17th century, especially when you get folks like the Puritans, Oliver Cromwell maybe being the most famous example, but he is just a figurehead. He's not the worst offender, but these folks are kind of looking back through their Bibles and going, hey, there's nothing in here about getting drunk for 12 days. And also there are shepherds feeding their sheep in the fields. That doesn't tend to happen in the dead of winter, so maybe this is all just made up. And so that is where they start shutting the book on this, and they say, okay, this is not a holiday. Don't go to church. If you're going to celebrate, keep it indoors. And so that's why they talk about banning Christmas in England and banning Christmas in Massachusetts. They don't ban Christmas here for the record, but I mean they try to, but I don't think they really succeed in doing much during the interregnum. But they have to keep banning it over and over again because people are not listening, right? So that is sort of 17th century Christmas. Eventually, a lot of these traditions are going to fade. People are going to stop getting drunk for 12 days, especially during the Industrial Revolution, when it's going to be like, that was an agricultural festival. You all have to work in the factory, and time is money, so can you go back and do that? But when you go to the 19th century, and you're going to have the Victorians who are getting really nostalgic for merry old England, they're like, man, people back then, they knew how to do it. Let's go back and rediscover all of our Christmas traditions. traditions. So how about this mincemeat? Ooh, it's got kind of rotted meat. Maybe we'll take that part out, but we'll keep the spices and the currants and things. So that's modern mince pies. Oh, you know, they have all these things where they get wildly drunk and they kiss each other under this bush. Well, maybe we'll get rid of the wildly drunk part, but we'll keep the mistletoe. You know, we'll do all these things. So they sort of reinvent the traditions, just excising the parts that involved, you know, raw meat and mass public licentiousness. Yeah. So, you know, that's the spirit of Christmas reinvented. But during this period of time, yeah, you have the battle between sort of the desires of people to, you know, have a big holiday, and especially the religious party in England, who was like, I don't know so much. So ultimately, the religious party kind of wins out in some ways, but it's more about just changing times and changing fashions. So, if you have any questions about our various activities here, we're basically just sitting here eating and drinking, which is
Sounds like a great day.
Which they would.
Yeah.
Is that? Yep. Having fun. Some of us are probably getting drunk.
Okay, that's what you're supposed to do.
2 years. They have, yes.
Wasn't there a haunted thing of ghosts died in here? That died in here?
Probably not here, but maybe somewhere else. But the French army at this point has suffered about 1 million casualties. That's killed and wounded. They're tired. They've just spent the year 1916 fighting to hold on to the town of Verdun, and morale is at a pretty low level. Unlike the American government or the British government that would do things like get special holiday meals brought up to the guys on the line or care packages from the government, the French soldier is entirely reliant on whatever his command can give him and what his family and friends from back home can send him. So he's going to ask for a care package, and I have written off to my wife in the town of Lisieux to send me a box. What do you think I'm asking for to be sent from home?
Food and warm supplies.
Correct. You're living in the middle. You're living essentially in a hole in the ground, and in Eastern France from November until May, it rains, and it rains a lot, and it gets cold. So the guys are asking for stuff like sweaters, extra socks, scarves, gloves, blankets. They're also asking for food. Now, why do you think they're asking for food? Doesn't the army feed you? What's that?
So, like, you can survive. So, like, if you're hungry during war.
Well, you're already getting food from the government. That's every day you're going to get two meals brought up to the line.
Well, what if, there's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. What about the third?
You don't get a third meal in the French army.
So, can't you ask your family for them?
So that's what they're doing. One of the reasons is that they're trying to augment what they're getting from the government. They're also trying to make the food they're getting a little more palatable. The French army is going to give you 2 meals a day. It's going to be a soup of some type and a loaf of bread at each meal. That's going to have to come from about a mile behind the line. So if it gets to you, or when it gets to you, what do you think? How warm do you think that food's going to be? Not at all.
Yep.
And the food that you are getting is a soup that normally consists of a rice, some sort of root and vegetable, cabbage, turnips, carrots, onions, and really, really bad cuts of meat. There was one account of a French soldier saying that when they got the soup brought up to him, they had to skim an inch of fat off the soup just to make it palatable. What's up?
What's that thing around your neck?
Gas mask. That's it. That's your gas mask. The World War I is the only conflict in modern time, at least in Europe, where you see large-scale amounts of poison gas deployed. So this is going to stop against chlorine gas and phosgene gas. It won't work against mustard gas. That's a different chemical compound.
Do you have any more questions, buddy?
Well, if the other team knows about that, wouldn't they just get the mustard stuff?
Yeah, that's the problem is you can make mustard gas if I don't know how to stop it at first. I don't have anything to use against it. So they had not come out with the mask for mustard gas yet.
Well, technically, there's one thing you can use.
Well, no, but he's talking about in his day.
Yeah.
He's not talking about now. Yeah.
Nowadays you got all kinds of stuff, but back then that was a new thing.
Everything done?
Yeah.
Let's see. What do you guys think?
You're talking about
Thank you.
sardines and nerve gas, right?
Phosgene is a kind of a nerve. Yeah, it's kind of the granddaddy of nerve agents. Yeah. Chlorine at this point is the real. That's the more common.
Native Americans to create a Protestant bastion to counterbalance against the Catholics, right? So just like the Romans took over England, they're thinking, we're going to Christianize the Native Americans and do it. And then you're kind of like, well,
like the way the Spanish were doing it in Central and South America.
Right, but there's this feeling in England, they're very conscious of how horrible the Spanish were. They're very conscious of that, and they don't want that. But by 1609, 1610, they're kind of like aspirations of having this be a peaceful transition, all but the most romanticized understand that's not really going to happen because of the violence that happened with Powhatan and the conflict that's come to that point. De La Warr and Thomas Dale that come here they're military men here to take over, right? Alexander Whitaker, though, is arguably one of these romanticized people who still thinks that there's a peaceful path here. Now, I don't know if you've ever read Roman history and the conquering of Britain, and I don't know if you know of like Northern Ireland in the 80s, but arguably the British Isles and the surrounding area were never conquered by the Romans, let alone peacefully, right? There's still conflict.
Peaceful, yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So there's this kind of, really, really innocent view of all of this, and aspirational, romanticized view of it. But by 1609, what happens? John Smith, before he goes back to England, he writes a series of pamphlets that sends him back to England. And all of England gets in this fervor of, the closest thing that we have to describe it would be kind of like a manifest destiny, where they're like, okay, you know what? God's on our side. There's all these sermons start being preached, right? All these pamphlets written about how God wants England to establish a Protestant, world here, right? And so everyone's all in. Well, as the Reformation continues and goes back and forth, obviously this is like massively washing over history, but things expand in the New World. Cromwell's reign comes in England in the early 1640s, and that has massive implications for things that are happening here in the colonies as well. There were separatist Protestant footholds that were here in Virginia, and obviously New England is full of Puritans. But when in 1642 there's a major victory for the Orthodoxy, right, for the crown. Excuse me, the other way around. Cromwell has a major victory. It's one of his establishing battles. And a bunch of the Orthodox people are told they can come here to Virginia. So Virginia becomes very much on the side of the crown and the Orthodoxy when about 2,000 nobles that are loyal to the king come here. And they're for kind of the Orthodox Anglican religion, and they're for the king. When it's all over with, when Cromwell's done, this is why Virginia is referred to as the Old Dominion, because we're seen as being loyal to the crown. But all the Protestants that were here were kind of pushed up to the northern colonies, right? The reason I'm talking about all this stuff is that this is the period of time where Christmas is made illegal, because in the 1620s and 30s is also the period of time where caroling becomes popular. It evolves. Yeah, exactly.
That's where you guys come out.
It evolves from people basically going to
Christmas, having that illegal. That
crazy. That you and everyone else.
Yeah, right.
Right. So the Protestants, they've only been reading the Bible in English for 100 years, and so you have every extreme of, hey, let's be Protestant. We're just not going to report to the Pope. To, we need a new church and everything. And nothing that's not in the Bible should be practiced, right?
So it's a free for all.
Well, for religious theology,
there's less control because you're pretty far away.
So the practice of caroling, especially in New England, because things are more dense, gets out of control. And the same thing happens in England. As it becomes more popular, instead of just people singing, caroling initially, it's like people going out into the orchards and kind of singing and spending time together, but also like it evolves from like pagan thoughts and belief of like, and pouring booze basically on your crop to make it do better, and then that turns into people kind of just going out into the field and singing and drinking together, and then then that turns into this Protestant, more like religious
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
thing that starts happening. But it starts to get out of control on a lot of there's writings and pamphlets of like crowds damaging property. The We Won't Go Until We Get Some is a really good remnant of this, where people are expecting, there's a tradition of rich people sharing and things like this, but it becomes a little bit more annoying them until they bring you things, right? But this pamphlet right here is on the vindication of Christmas, and that's why I'm going through all of this, because the reaction to these laws are in the early 1640s in New England and later in England. In England, they're not very heavily enforced because
only used chemical weapon at this point in the war is chlorine gas.
When did muscat start showing up?
Tail end of 1916 is when it first starts making its appearance on the battlefield.
By the Germans.
By the Germans, yep. All the chemical weapons start on the German side, and then it's sort of one of those where it's like, well, we know we can make this agent and use it, but we're not going to do that unless the other side uses it. And the Germans did it. So at that point, now you're using mustard.
What does muscat come out of?
How's it delivered, or how it's made?
How's it made?
Believe it's a sulfur base for it. I'm not sure the chemical composition, but I know sulfur is a big component in it.
Nice yellow gas.
Yeah.
You think mustard would come before Thrugh, isn't it? More towards World War II side, more in thinking.
Nerve agents are really that comes is more like you said of World War II, but phosgene is that's the starting point in World War I, and they realize, we can improve on this.
The United States, we also get all of our mail, and we also get lots of care packages. They could send packages of up to about 3 pounds and of a certain size of whatever they wanted to send. It wasn't like now where they inspect stuff. The things most often asked for from the American soldiers were cigarettes, candy, and something to keep warm.
Aww.
So wool socks, wool gloves, stocking caps or balaclavas.
That's crazy. Nice. Well, thank you. And the leather coat you have there, is that period or?
It is. This is called a jerkin. They wore that over the regular uniform to help keep a little bit warmer.
Okay.
If you were an officer, you could get something like a great coat. It's actually called a trench coat.
Yeah.
And it's one of the ones that comes down to right here.
Now, would that have been where we got the term trench coat from, the trenches of World War I?
Yes, ma'am.
That is crazy. Who knew that? Oh my God. I love it. I love it. All right, we're going to keep moving because we have a 4-year-old who we're losing the attention of.
Go through the motions. All right. When you just hear the command load, that means you go through all the motions, right? So finish up all the way. Okay, concentrate on that barrel position. Rear rank, you're especially in tune to this because remember your interval is where your musket goes halfway, to the person in front of you. Be very careful in the rear rank.
Take ready!
1, 2.
Take aim!
1, 2.
Fire!
Boom. 1, 2.
Prime and load.
All right, you guys look really good. Just looking.
But thank you.